The key for today is trust in God. Trust in God. I remember being really young. I was about 5 years old. I don't know why I remember this, but I remember holding up my hand and thinking, I am 5 years old and I have 5 fingers. I remember the intersection we were at. I was in the back seat. I was with my mom. We're at this intersection right by my high school, and elementary school at the time. The little 4-way intersection right by the McDonald's, and then there's that flower shop that's kind of diagonal in Independence, Kentucky. We were at that little 4-way stop, and I remember having this very strange idea. We were listening to a song that talked about God, and I, as a 5-year-old, I had this idea that God is consciousness. That consciousness is God. I was 5 years old, and I don't know how, but I had this awareness at the time that God originates from within. That God originates from within our own mind. That we are God in some sense. That we are connected to God because we are conscious. God's not out there in the sky. God is in my little head, my little 5-year-old head. I don't know how I picked up on that, but I did. I remember being 5. So anyways, I believe that we are all connected to God because you're alive, because you're conscious, because you are a human being, because you're out here being a human. I believe that you're connected to God. Whether you like it, whether you know it, you are connected to God. And so that's important. There's something there. There's something self-evident about God. So trust in God. That's the key for today. Trust in God. Let's trust in Him. Now, why does this matter? Why does it matter that you trust in God? Why not trust in Tom Brady or something? Why trust in God over anything else you could insert there? I personally believe it's important to follow God because I believe that the Bible, the books in the Bible and the words that are in it, I believe that they are true. True is an interesting word. There's different types of truths, okay? So there is empirical truth. There's, kind of more scientific truth, a mathematical truth, like 2 + 2 = 4. You can have 2 apples and then someone could come over and put 2 apples next to the other 2 apples and you could go 1, 2, 3, 4. And you would have confidence that 2 + 2 does equal 4. You would have evidence, and you would count that as true. You would say 2 + 2 does equal 4. That is true. That's one type of truth. There's also this concept of metaphorical truth. Metaphorical truth. What's metaphorical truth? Metaphorical truth is the idea that if you believe something, even though it is, how do I phrase this? This is just outside my realm of intellect. Come on. Metaphorical truth. It's believing that something is right, even though it might be objectively false. But if you were to believe that it's right, you would come out further ahead having believed and accepted it. So metaphorical truth is believing that God exists. Even though we cannot prove fact, with our science, with our rationality, even though we cannot prove the existence of God, it's a metaphorical truth that if you believe in Him and trust in Him, that you come out in a more advantageous position having accepted the presupposition that God is real. And that's a metaphorical truth. And the metaphorical truth thing applies to guns. The metaphorical truth is all guns are loaded. That is a metaphorical truth that if you abide by, you are in a safer, better landscape for well-being. All guns are loaded. So if someone let's say someone's handling a gun next to me, they should treat that gun as if it's loaded, and so they should check that there's no bullets in it. They should not point it at anything that they would be afraid to shoot. And even if I watch them and I can see factually that the gun is not loaded because I just watched them. There's no bullets around. I know that the gun is unloaded. Even so, if that person were to hand me the gun, my metaphorical truth is all guns are loaded. Even though it's objectively false, my metaphorical truth of all guns are loaded, I'm going to handle that weapon as if it were loaded. So if they were to hand it to me, I would make sure there's no bullets in the chamber. I'd drop the magazine. I'd make sure there's no bullets in the gun. And that's my metaphorical truth. And it might look redundant to someone, on the surface level empirical sense, it might look redundant to double check that the gun is not loaded after I saw someone else do it, but that is a form of metaphorical truth. So this begs the question, how does one trust in God? How do I trust in God? Well, I need to trust in God more, for sure, 100%. There's really 7 areas of my life that have been, I felt weakened. I felt like I'm lacking, like they're challenging me. There's 7 areas. What are these 7 areas? Well, sadly, my grandpa passed about a week ago, and that is somber and sad on the surface. Death is not exactly the greatest part of life, but there's a lot of emotion in that, and I don't really know how to feel. I'm happy that my grandpa is at peace. I feel closer to my grandpa that he's passed. I feel like he's with me now. I feel like he's with God, and because I believe that God is within me, I feel like I'm closer to my grandpa in some strange sense. So there's emotion there. Emotion is important. Trust. How does that look, trusting in God in that scenario? Well, I trust that my grandpa is with God. I trust that my grandpa is in heaven. I trust that my grandpa's with me now. I trust that. And so that gives me a bit of peace. It gives me a bit of closure knowing that. And it's helping me process the loss of my grandpa and the fleetingness of life. It's helping me make sense of that. So trust in God. Another area is obviously the wedding coming up. Me and Asia's wedding is about 1 month away from the time I'm recording this. So trust in God. I'm starting to get a little anxious. I'm starting to get a little nervous about the wedding. I want it to go a certain way. I don't want anything to go wrong. I want people to have a good time. I'm starting to think about, what if something goes wrong? I'm having that anxious nervousness about it, and trusting God. I'm giving it to God. God, you will be there with Asia and I on our wedding, and I won't. God, I'm trusting in you that you're going to give me the strength and the courage to be present on that day, to feel the full effect in the love of the moment. I trust that God is going to allow me to see the event for what it is, which is a coming together of 2 souls, intertwined in faith, intertwined in love, intertwined in support from the family. I view it as a beautiful moment, and I'm grateful, and I think it's a huge privilege to be able to get married and have a wedding. It's a huge privilege. So I trust in God that my measly little emotions, my little anxiety, my little scared, cowardice inside me, I trust that God is stronger than that feeling. I trust in God in that scenario. So this is how it practically plays out. If you're gonna trust in God, how does that actually look in life? I'm showing you. So Grandpa, trust in God. The wedding, trust in God. Give it to God. I trust in God. Work. Work is stressing me out. I'll say it. Work is stressing me out. A lot of moving pieces, a lot of factors, a lot of new time commitments because I've taken on more responsibility. I work in sales. It's an inherently stressful field. I trust that God, if all fails, if it all comes crashing down, I have trust in God that I'm going to be okay, no matter what happens. If we succeed past heights we could that weren't even conceivable. If we just, crush it, we win. I trust that God is going to be through it in that process. If the whole plane starts going down and we all crash and burn and die, I have trust in God, because God's greater than these earthly little concerns. So give it to God. I was hiking the other day, and these 7 areas of my life popped into my head, and I'm thinking, I started organizing my thoughts. I started organizing what this means. I started lining up these 7 categories of my life, these areas that I compartmentalize that are different. And I started organizing and trying to problem solve and trying to analyze what needs to be done. And then at one fell swoop, I had the thought of grab all 7 of them and throw them up to God. Trust in the Lord. I'm sitting here trying to mathematically do the addition on how to handle life's problems, when in reality, if I just give it to God and trust in God, it's all solved. One fell swoop. There's a level of security and peace and confidence that comes from that, from having that in your life. There is comfort in that, and there is utility in that, and there is truth in that. And so I'm trying to trust in God more. I am trusting in God more, rather. How do you foster this trust, this closeness with God? I would say it's through prayer. I believe that it's through prayer. And I think it's learning how to pray to God is probably one of the most powerful things I've ever learned in my life, is how to pray to God. And I learned that about 6 years ago. And I remember not understanding it. And I remember asking the people that were around at the time, how do I pray? And the advice that was given to me is give God your heart, give God your mind, give God your entire spirit, give God your entire soul. When you pray to God, give him your heart. God already knows the ins and outs of your heart. God already knows what you're thinking. God already knows your faults. God already knows what your sin is. God knows the inner workings of your heart. Even so, you should still voluntarily give it to him with your spoken word. There's something about expressing yourself openly, honestly, and vulnerably to God, to your own conception of God, to your own ideal. There is something very, very magical about it. There is something very powerful about trusting in God so much that you are able to communicate directly with him. And that's how you foster closeness. If you had a friend and you were thinking, how could I be closer to my friend? Start with talking to them. Start with communicating with them regularly. If you wanted to become closer to your spouse, how often would you guys have to talk? Probably every day, and probably about important things. So it's the same thing with God. If you trust in God and you want to bring that to fruition and bring that to life, it's through prayer. I love praying. The thing I miss the most about living in my college town, Bowling Green, was just being able to pray with other people, with other believers. Gosh, I miss praying with other people, because there's vulnerability in it. I feel like so much of life, this secular life, that we're just not getting to the crux of the matter. We're not really putting our finger on the important part of this existence, of this consciousness. We are not tapped in to this element of our lives that's the most important. We are numb. We are preoccupied with things that do not matter. And so when you pray and you give God your heart, what's more powerful than that? What matters more than that, than the inner workings of your heart and your mind and your soul? So if you're asking, how do I trust in God more? It's through prayer. It's through, going somewhere where you feel like you can pray, and just give God your heart. Dear God, here I am. Here's what I'm going through. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's where I'm messing up. Here's where I feel like I'm falling short. Here's where I need strength. Here's the true nature of my inner essence, God. Here it is. Lay that out to God and trust and know that he's receiving it. And through the process of prayer, you're building your own trust in God. It's kind of just a psychological truism, perhaps. So